On a frozen winter beach in America, a rich young heir made one phone call that destroyed a man's quiet life. He claimed a German shepherd had attacked his girlfriend. Police arrived. The man didn't fight back. He didn't shout. He simply knelt in the snow as his dog was dragged away, screaming in fear. What no one on that beach knew was that the silent, bearded stranger in handcuffs was once a Navy SEAL. And the dog they treated like a weapon had saved lives on battlefields overseas. That lie was about to wake forces far bigger than money, power, or influence. Because some men don't look dangerous anymore until you push them too far. If you believe compassion can rewrite destiny, like the video, subscribe for more stories and comment where you're watching. See where this story will go. A brutal winter morning pressed down on Cannon Beach, Oregon, where icy wind carried fine snow across gray sand, and the Pacific lay heavy and silent, as if guarding a secret too old to speak. Daniel Carter walked slowly along the shoreline, his boots crunching softly against frozen sand, each step measured deliberate, as though the cold demanded respect. At 45, he stood just over 6 feet tall, his frame still strong, but thinned by years of isolation and sleepless nights. A dark brown leather jacket, scarred and softened by age, hung heavily on his shoulders, layered over a reddened navy flannel shirt. A gray wool scarf wrapped his neck, shielding skin weathered by wind and regret. His jeans were faded and worn at the knees, tucked into thick leather boots built for cold terrain. His hair, dark brown and slightly overgrown, brushed the back of his neck, streaked with silver at the temples. A rough shadow of stubble covered his angular jaw, and his deep gray eyes reflected something distant memories that never truly slept. At his left side moved Rocky, a 7-year-old German shepherd, with a thick sable coat dulled slightly by winter moisture. The dog walked without a leash, perfectly aligned with Daniel's stride head level, ears alert but calm. His amber eyes scanned the horizon, not with curiosity, but with trained awareness. Rocky's body carried the quiet confidence of a working animal, disciplined, controlled, and deeply bonded. He did not pull ahead nor lag behind. He stayed close enough that Daniel could feel the warmth of him through the cold. They did not speak. They did not look at one another. They did not need to. Daniel's thoughts drifted inward, as they often did during these walks. Winter had always been easier than summer. The cold matched the silence he carried inside. The snow numbed the noise of the past. The echoes of orders shouted the sound of metal tearing through air, the weight of decisions that could never be undone. Here on this stretch of beach, he was no one. Just a man and his dog moving through a world that didn't ask questions. The stillness shattered with the sudden roar of an engine. A black SUV burst down the access path, tires spinning as it cut illegally onto the snow-covered sand. Music thumped from inside, loud and careless, tearing through the quiet like an insult. Daniel slowed instinctively, his shoulders tightening, eyes narrowing not in fear, but awareness. Rocky's ears flicked once toward the sound, then settled. The SUV skidded to a stop several yards ahead. A young man stepped out first, Lucas Bennett, 21, tall and well-fed, with the careless confidence of inherited wealth. He wore a designer winter coat that looked expensive but impractical, his blonde hair styled neatly despite the wind, his clean-shaven face sharp with entitlement. Lucas carried himself like the world had always stepped aside for him, and he expected it to continue doing so. From the passenger side emerged Madison Reed, 20 years old, slim and fashionably dressed in a cream-colored coat and knee-high boots unsuited for snow. Her long blonde hair spilled from beneath a knit hat, makeup flawless and deliberate. She clutched her handbag tightly, irritation written across her face, as she glanced at the bleak winter beach, clearly unhappy to be anywhere without warmth or attention. Daniel intended to pass them without incident. He angled slightly closer to the waterline, offering no challenge, no acknowledgement. Rocky continued forward, breathing a little heavier from the cold, his paws steady against the frozen ground. As they drew near, Rocky briefly turned his head, exhaling sharply, his breath fogging the air as he registered unfamiliar scents. Madison screamed. The sound was sharp, sudden, theatrical. She stumbled backward into the snow, dropping her handbag as she shrieked that the dog was attacking her. Her eyes were wide, but not with terror. There was calculation, their fear rehearsed rather than felt. Lucas reacted instantly, adrenaline and ego flaring. He stepped forward aggressively, shouting, his face flushing red as he positioned himself between Madison and the dog. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he yelled, bending to scoop snow and sand into his hand. Without hesitation, he kicked it violently toward Rocky's face. The impact startled the dog. Snow and grit struck Rocky's muzzle and eyes. He sneezed sharply, head shaking once. But he did not lunge. He did not growl. Instead, he sat down immediately, posture straight, ears, lowered eyes locked on Daniel, awaiting instruction. Daniel felt something tighten deep in his chest. Not panic. Not fear. Something colder. Protective. He stepped forward once, his voice low and roughened by the wind. "He didn't do anything." Lucas sneered, eyes darting between Daniel's worn clothes and the dog. "That thing tried to attack my girlfriend." Daniel shook his head slowly. "He's trained. He won't hurt anyone." Madison clung to Lucas's arm, breathing fast, her voice trembling just enough to sell the lie. "It came right at me." Lucas had already pulled out his phone. His fingers moved quickly, practiced. "Yeah, we'll see what the cops say." The siren came minutes later, slicing through the falling snow. A patrol car rolled onto the beach lights, flashing red and blue against the gray horizon. Officer Mark Harlan stepped out. 38 years old, broad-shouldered, his face hardened by years of routine authority. His dark hair was cropped short beneath his cap, his expression unreadable, eyes already narrowed in judgment. Harlan did not ask questions. He did not inspect the tracks in the snow, nor note Rocky's calm posture. He listened only to Lucas, nodding slightly as the young man spoke, anger and entitlement dripping from every word. Daniel stood quietly, hands at his sides, jaw set. Years ago, this stance had meant readiness. Now it meant restraint. "Turn around," Harlan ordered. Daniel complied without protest. Cold steel cuffs snapped shut around his wrists, biting into skin already numb from the weather. Behind him, another vehicle arrived. Animal control. A man in a heavy jacket stepped out, avoiding eye contact as he approached Rocky with a pole. The dog sensed the shift instantly. He whined once, confusion breaking through discipline eyes, searching Daniel's face. "It's okay," Daniel said, voice tight. The pole loop tightened. Rocky cried out a sharp, panicked sound that cut through Daniel like a blade. He struggled briefly, paws digging into the snow, desperate to stay near the only person he trusted. Daniel dropped to his knees in the snow, hands cuffed behind him, breath hitching as he watched Rocky dragged toward the cage in the back of the van. Their eyes locked. Rocky's ears flattened, tail low, his gaze pleading, terrified, loyal to the end. The metal door slammed shut. Snow fell heavier now, settling on Daniel's shoulders as he knelt, head bowed, breath fogging the air. No one there knew who he was. No one knew what the dog had been. Only that winter had grown colder than before. Snow continued to fall outside the Seabrook Police Department, soft flakes blurring the streetlights and muting the small coastal town into a pale, suspended silence that felt detached from time. Daniel Carter was escorted through the side entrance of the station, his boots leaving wet prints on the tiled floor, as melting snow clung stubbornly to the leather. The building smelled of old coffee disinfectant, and something metallic beneath it all, a scent Daniel associated with places where control mattered more than truth. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, harsh and unforgiving flattening color, and casting everyone in the same tired yellow glow. At 45, Daniel looked older under these lights. The lines at the corners of his eyes deepened his angular face more severe. His shoulders remained squared despite the cold steel cuffs biting into his wrists' posture straight, not out of defiance but habit ingrained through years, when slouching could get someone killed. His dark leather jacket had been taken, leaving him in the red and navy flannel shirt sleeves, rolled just enough to reveal forearms marked by faded scars and thick calluses. He kept his eyes forward, jaw clenched, breathing slow and measured, controlling the familiar pressure building behind his ribs. They sat him on a metal bench near the holding area. Officer Mark Harlan stood nearby, arms crossed, his expression flat and dismissive. Harlan had the build of a man who lifted weights to feel powerful, thick neck, square jaw, closely trimmed beard that framed a mouth rarely used for listening. Years earlier, a failed internal investigation had taught him one lesson. Well, ask fewer questions and side with the right people. Tonight, Lucas Bennett counted as the right people. "Sit tight," Harlan muttered, already turning away. Daniel did not respond. His thoughts were no longer on the cold or the humiliation of the cuffs. They were on Rocky. The sharp cry the dog had made when the pole tightened replayed in his mind, looping with merciless clarity. Daniel swallowed hard, his throat tightening. He had survived mortar fire ambushes, nights where death came quietly on padded feet. None of that compared to the helplessness of watching someone you loved taken while you were forced to kneel. Minutes passed. Maybe more. Time inside stations always warped, stretching and compressing without warning. Daniel finally spoke, his voice low and rough, not demanding, not pleading. "My dog," he said. "Is he hurt?" Harlan glanced back, irritation flashing across his face. "Animal Control's handling it," he replied. "If it's dangerous, they'll deal with it." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Dangerous. The word settled in his chest like ice. He said nothing more. At the booking desk sat Officer Hannah Moore. 27 years old, she had joined the Seabrook Police Department less than a year earlier, still new enough that the edges of her idealism hadn't yet been worn down. Hannah was tall and slim, standing just under 5'8", with straight brown hair pulled into a practical low ponytail. Her skin was pale freckled lightly across the bridge of her nose, and her gray-green eyes held an alertness that hadn't dulled into routine. She moved carefully, deliberately, as if every action mattered, and to her it still did. Hannah noticed Daniel the moment he was brought in, not because of his clothes or the accusation, but because of how he carried himself. Most men brought in angry or drunk, slouched, cursed, or postured. Daniel did none of that. Even seated, cuffed, stripped of authority, he occupied space quietly like a pillar that refused to bend. His eyes weren't darting. His breathing wasn't erratic. He looked centered. When Harlan dropped the paperwork on her desk, Hannah skimmed it, brow furrowing. Assault, dangerous animal, disorderly conduct. The words didn't match the man sitting silently nearby. Name, she asked, looking up. Daniel Carter, he replied without hesitation. His voice was calm, steady, the kind that didn't seek approval. Harlan snorted. Probably fake. Hannah ignored him and typed the name into the system. Date of birth, Daniel answered. She continued, her eyes flicking occasionally to his hands. The calluses stood out thick, layered, not the roughness of construction work, but something more specific, more symmetrical. She'd seen them once before during academy training in a slideshow about military personnel. Her pulse quickened slightly. When she guided Daniel to the biometric scanner, her fingers brushed his sleeve. He felt how cold he was. Not shivering cold, controlled cold. The kind you endured rather than fought. "Place your thumb here," she said softly. The machine hummed. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the screen froze. Lines of code flashed briefly before the display went dark. Hannah frowned. "That's strange." She tapped the keyboard. The system didn't respond. Then the screen lit up red. Not a soft warning. A hard, pulsing crimson that seemed to radiate urgency. Text appeared in stark white letters, technical and unmistakable. Hannah's breath caught in her throat. She leaned closer, reading it twice to be sure her eyes weren't deceiving her. Her mouth went dry. Her heart began to pound. She looked up slowly at Daniel. He was watching her now, his gray eyes unreadable but attentive. He knew. Not what the screen said exactly, but that something had shifted. Hannah stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. Harlan turned, annoyance already forming. "What now? There's a system issue," she said, choosing her words carefully. Her voice wavered despite her effort. "I need to verify something." Harlan scoffed. "Just book him." "I can't," Hannah replied, firmer this time. "The system won't allow it." Harlan stepped closer, peering at the screen. He squinted, then waved a dismissive hand. "Glitch. Happens all the time. Restart it." Hannah didn't move. Training manuals echoed in her head. Red alerts weren't glitches. Red alerts were never glitches. She turned back to Daniel. "Sir," she said quietly, lowering her voice so only he could hear, "Are you military?" Daniel hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. Enough to confirm her fear, enough to remind him of promises made long ago to stay invisible. He met her gaze, his expression calm but heavy. "I just want my dog," he said. That was answer enough. Hannah swallowed, hands trembling as she logged out, and initiated a deeper verification protocol. The red warning remained pulsing steadily, as if counting down something unseen. She felt suddenly very small in a room that no longer felt safe. Daniel was led toward the holding cells. The door clanged shut behind him with a sound that reverberated through his bones. He sat on the narrow bench, back straight, hands resting on his knees despite the cuffs. Around him the station continued, its low hum phones ringing, officers laughing softly at a desk, the mundane rhythm of a system unaware it had just crossed a line. Daniel closed his eyes and focused on his breathing, forcing down the rising fear not for himself, but for Rocky. Somewhere nearby, his dog was alone, confused, frightened. Daniel made himself a promise in the quiet of the cell. This would not end the way they expected. Outside the holding area, Hannah Moore stood frozen at her desk, staring at the red-lit screen, understanding fully now that Daniel Carter was not just another man caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was something else entirely. And Seabrook had just made a very dangerous mistake. Snow thickened outside the Seabrook Police Department, the storm growing denser as night pressed down on the small coastal town, muffling sound and wrapping the streets in a deceptive calm that felt like the held breath before impact. Daniel Carter sat alone in the holding cell, the concrete bench cold even through layers of denim. The metal bars cast long shadows across his boots as fluorescent lights flickered overhead. He kept his back straight, shoulders, squared hands resting loosely despite the cuffs having been removed for processing. Years of conditioning told his body to conserve energy to remain still until movement mattered. Inside, however, his thoughts churned relentlessly, all of them orbiting the same image, Rocky's eyes behind the steel cage, wide with confusion, searching for him. The door at the end of the corridor opened with a sharp, metallic echo. Officer Hannah Moore approached her steps, measured but tense. Up close, the strain in her face was impossible to hide. Her normally neat uniform looked slightly rumpled, now her pale fingers gripping a clipboard too tightly. She had replayed the warning on her screen dozens of times in her head, already each repetition deepening the pit in her stomach. "You're allowed one phone call," Hannah said quietly, stopping just outside the bars. Her voice lacked authority now. It carried something closer to respect, mixed with fear. 3 minutes. Daniel stood. At full height, he seemed to fill the narrow space not with aggression but presence. His gray eyes met hers, steady, searching. "Thank you," he said. It wasn't courtesy. It was acknowledgement. She led him to the wall-mounted phone near the booking desk. Officer Mark Harlan leaned nearby, arms crossed, chewing gum, loudly, his impatience obvious. He had dismissed Hannah's concerns as rookie nerves, but the unease creeping into the station was becoming harder to ignore. Radios crackled with half-heard chatter, and more than one officer had paused to stare at the snow-whitened windows as if expecting something to appear. "Make it quick," Harlan muttered. Daniel picked up the receiver. For a brief moment he hesitated, thumb resting above the keypad. He had promised himself years ago never to make this call unless there was no other choice. Pride had kept him silent. Guilt had kept him distant. But pride meant nothing compared to the life waiting for him in a cold cage somewhere across town. He dialed the number from memory. The line rang once, then twice, then a click. "This line is secure," came the voice on the other end, low and firm, edged with age and authority. "Colonel Richard Hayes," Daniel said evenly. There was a pause. A long one. When Hayes spoke again, his tone had changed, sharpened by recognition. "I was wondering when you'd break your silence, Carter." Richard Hayes was 63 now, though his voice still carried the iron edge of command. Years earlier, he had been a towering figure, broad-shouldered, square-jawed, with steel-gray hair cropped close, and eyes that missed nothing. Time had weathered him, but not softened him. A classified operation gone wrong overseas had shaped both men, permanently forging loyalty and distance in equal measure. "I wouldn't be calling if I had a choice," Daniel replied. His voice lowered. "They took my dog." Silence fell on the line again, heavier this time. Hayes knew what that meant. He knew what Rocky represented. "Where are you?" he asked. "Seabrook. Local PD." Another pause. Daniel imagined Hayes standing from his desk spine, straightening out of old habit, hand already reaching for a phone that carried more weight than any badge in the building Daniel stood in now. "Stay where you are," Hayes said. "Say nothing else to anyone. I'm handling it." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "He's a good dog," he said, the words escaping before he could stop them. "He doesn't deserve this." "Neither do you," Hayes replied. The line went dead. Daniel replaced the receiver carefully. When he turned, Hannah was watching him closely. Harlan scoffed. "Let me guess," he said. Calling in favors, Daniel didn't answer. He allowed Hannah to lead him back toward the holding cell without resistance. As the door clanged shut behind him again, something shifted in the air, subtle, invisible, but unmistakable. Across town, in a warm living room lit by the blue glow of a television, the video Lucas Bennett had posted began to unravel. Lucas, 21, and Smug had uploaded it with a caption boasting about protecting my girlfriend from a vicious dog. At first, comments flooded in praising his bravery. But then the internet did what it always did. It slowed the footage, replayed it, zoomed in. Viewers noticed Rocky sitting calmly in the snow, unmoving. They noticed Daniel's hands never leaving his sides, his posture controlled. They noticed Lucas's kick the arc of snow striking the dog's face. The tone shifted. Comments turned sharp, then angry. Screenshots spread. Threads multiplied. Accusations of abuse, entitlement, corruption. Inside the station, Hannah watched the notifications light up on a shared monitor. Her heart pounded as realization spread among the officers. Harlan's jaw tightened as his phone buzzed repeatedly with missed calls. Outside, the storm intensified. Wind howled down the street, rattling signs and piling snow against parked cars. Then came a new sound, deep, rhythmic, unmistakable. A helicopter. The thudding rotors cut through the storm, shaking the building's windows. Officers froze mid-conversation. Radios crackled to life with urgent chatter. Hannah moved toward the front doors, pulse racing her breath, visible in the cold air that rushed in as the doors opened. Red and blue lights reflected off the swirling snow as vehicles pulled to the curb. Dark shapes moved with purpose beyond the glass. The helicopter hovered overhead, searchlight, slicing through the storm like a blade. In his cell, Daniel lifted his head slowly. He recognized that sound. It wasn't rescue yet. It was acknowledgement. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply, anchoring himself to the one thought that mattered. Wherever Rocky was, this would reach him too. The truth was awake now. And once awake, it would not be put back to sleep. Dawn broke under a bruised winter sky as snow drifted sideways across Seabrook, the wind scraping along brick and glass, while the town woke to a sound it had never learned to ignore. The helicopter settled into a low hover above the police department, its rotors beating the air into submission, shaking the windows and rattling nerves already stretched thin. Dark vehicles followed tires crunching over frozen slush as they boxed the street with practiced precision. Inside the station's fluorescent hum felt suddenly small, powerless. Daniel Carter stood behind the bars, watching the shadows move across the frosted glass, his breathing steady even as something long buried began to surface. He had spent years perfecting invisibility, learning how to fold his past into a quiet life, measured by walks on a cold beach and the soft weight of a dog at his side. Now that past had arrived with engines and authority, Officer Hannah Moore felt the shift before anyone spoke. She straightened instinctively, shoulders back, eyes forward, the rookie stiffness replaced by focus. Officer Mark Harlan, by contrast, wiped his palms on his pants, his jaw tightening as he glanced at his buzzing phone. When the doors opened, the room filled with cold air and men who moved like a single organism. Federal military police entered first uniforms, crisp beneath winter coats, faces disciplined eyes, scanning without hostility or warmth. Leading them was Commander Alex Turner, a man in his early 50s with iron-gray hair cut close and a lean build that spoke of endurance rather than show. A thin scar traced his right cheekbone, a reminder of a training accident years earlier that had made him meticulous, unforgiving of sloppiness. Turner's gaze settled on Daniel, recognition flickering once, then locking into something like resolve. "This detention ends now," Turner said calmly, his voice carrying without effort. He nodded to Hannah, who moved quickly to unlock the cell hands, no longer trembling. Harlan started to protest, words tumbling over one another, but Turner silenced him with a look that made excuses feel childish. Papers appeared, credentials verified, radios crackled. Daniel stepped out, cuffs removed, circulation returning to his wrists in a sharp, stinging wave. He rolled his shoulders once, grounding himself, then met Turner's eyes. Daniel Carter Turner said, "Former Navy SEAL, multiple classified operations? You should have never been booked." Daniel inclined his head, neither accepting nor rejecting the label. "Where's my dog?" Turner hesitated. "Animal control facility, separate hold." "Then I'm not leaving," Daniel replied. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I won't go anywhere without Rocky." The words landed with finality. Turner studied him, measuring not rank, but conviction. Years earlier, Turner had watched men break under pressure, and others stand immovable for reasons that had nothing to do with orders. He nodded once. Then we're going to get him. The convoy cut through town, toward the animal control center on the outskirts, a low concrete building crouched against marshland and ice. Daniel rode in silence, hands clasped, eyes fixed ahead, the familiar ache of anticipation settling in his chest. He remembered other rides, other facilities, the smell of disinfectant, and fear. Hannah followed in a patrol car, her thoughts racing the gravity of what she had witnessed reshaping her understanding of the badge she wore. Inside the animal control center, the air was thick with bleach and damp fur. The manager, Carl Whitman, a heavyset man in his late 40s with thinning hair and perpetually tired eyes, stood wringing his hands. Years of underfunding and public indifference had made him cautious, procedural to a fault. "We followed protocol," he insisted, voice thin. "The dog was labeled aggressive. We isolated him." Where Turner asked. Whitman pointed down a corridor lined with chain-link enclosures. "End kennel, red tag." Daniel didn't wait. He moved with controlled urgency, boots echoing softly on concrete. As he approached, the sound reached him before the sight, a frantic scraping of claws against metal, a broken, high-pitched whine that cut through the room like glass. Rocky. The kennel at the end was dimmer, colder. Rocky stood inside muscles, rigid fur, bristling saliva flecking his muzzle as he lunged at the fence, then recoiled, trapped in a cycle of panic. His amber eyes were wild, unmoored, searching for a world that had vanished without warning. The tag on the gate read "Dangerous" in red block letters. "Back up," Whitman called nervously. "He's been trying to break out. We were about to sedate him." "No," Daniel said. The word carried weight. He knelt slowly on the cold concrete, lowering himself to Rocky's level hands, open posture, softening. Years of training guided him now, not tactical, but intimate, the language learned in dust and darkness. "Rocky," he said quietly, voice rough with emotion he refused to hide. "It's me." The dog froze mid-snarl. Ears twitched. The frantic pacing slowed. Rocky's chest heaved as he pulled air into lungs that had forgotten calm. Daniel stayed still, eyes locked on the dog's, his presence a familiar anchor. "Easy, boy," he murmured the cadence, steady, reassuring. "You're safe." Recognition flickered like a spark catching dry tinder. Rocky let out a low, broken whine, pressing his nose against the wire, trembling now, not with fear, but release. His body sagged, strength draining as trust flooded back in. Whitman fumbled with the keys, hands shaking, and swung the gate open. Rocky didn't bolt. He collapsed forward into Daniel, all 80 pounds of him paws, scrambling, head burrowing against Daniel's chest. The impact knocked Daniel back onto the concrete, the cold seeping through his clothes as he wrapped his arms around the dog's neck fingers, burying into thick fur. The dam broke. Daniel's shoulders shook, breath hitching as a sob tore free, raw and unguarded. He pressed his face into Rocky's rough, whispering apologies, promises, his voice breaking in a way it never had on any battlefield. Rocky responded with desperate licks and soft cries, tail thumping weakly against the floor, his entire body trembling, as if he needed to feel Daniel everywhere at once. The room fell silent. Turner turned away, jaw tight, giving them space. Hannah stood, frozen eyes wet, witnessing a truth no training manual had prepared her for. Minutes passed before Daniel rose, steadying himself, keeping one hand on Rocky's collar, as if letting go might undo reality. Rocky leaned into his leg, pressed close, eyes clear again, dignity restored. Daniel looked to Turner. "Thank you," Turner nodded. "Let's finish this." They walked out together into the cold light of morning, the storm easing as if conceding. Daniel did not look back. His name was no longer buried, and neither was the bond that had brought him here. He had Rocky. That was enough. Winter settled gently over the coast, a pale dawn stretching across the ocean as mist hovered low and the cold softened sound leaving the world hushed, as if it were learning how to listen again. The courthouse steps were slick with ice. When the ruling came down, the words spoken plainly and without drama, the way consequences often arrive after the shouting is done. Lucas Bennett stood stiffly beside his attorney, shoulders hunched inside an expensive coat that no longer looked impressive. At 21, he appeared smaller now, his youthful arrogance stripped away by weeks of public scrutiny. His blonde hair was unstyled, his jaw-tight eyes darting toward the gathered onlookers, as the judge sentenced him to community service hours, measured not in fines, but in labor-cleaning beaches and public spaces through the winter months. Lucas nodded once, swallowing hard, the lesson landing heavy and unavoidable. Money could delay many things, but it could not erase video, nor could it quiet the collective judgment of a town that had finally seen itself clearly. Across the street, Officer Mark Harlan exited a municipal building with a cardboard box clutched to his chest. At 38, his broad frame sagged under a weight he had never trained for. The trimmed beard that once framed a confident grin now hid a trembling mouth. He avoided eye contact, shoulders tight, moving quickly past the cameras. Suspension paperwork would be followed by investigations. The system he trusted to protect him had turned methodical and cold. Harlan had learned too late that habits formed in comfort crumble when exposed to light. Inside the Seabrook Police Department, the air felt different. Cleaner. Lighter. Officer Hannah Moore stood at the front desk in a crisp uniform that fit her slim frame with new authority. Her promotion had come quietly, without ceremony, signed and delivered with the acknowledgement that doing the right thing sometimes mattered more than doing what was easy. At 27, Hannah carried herself with a steadier confidence. Now her straight brown hair still pulled back, simply her gray-green eyes sharper but unclouded. She trained a junior officer through intake procedures emphasizing verification over assumption, tone, calm, and precise. The red alert that once haunted her screen had become a lesson, etched into policy and into her spine. Daniel Carter watched none of it. He declined interviews, refused statements, and ignored the requests that came wrapped in praise and curiosity. The past had surfaced, and he had accepted that necessity, but he would not live there again. He returned instead to the small cedar cabin, perched near the edge of the dunes, its weathered boards silvered by salt and time. The house was modest, one bedroom, a stone fireplace, a wide porch that faced the water, but it had what mattered: quiet, distance, the ocean's steady honesty. Daniel unpacked slowly, methodically, placing things where his hands remembered them belonging. The old leather jacket hung by the door. The gray scarf draped over a chair. He brewed tea rather than coffee, the steam rising like a brief prayer, and sat by the window as the light shifted across the waves. At 45, he felt the ache of years lived at a distance from himself, but also the relief of returning to a rhythm that asked nothing except presence. Rocky lay at his feet, stretched across a thick rug, the German shepherd's sable coat catching the firelight. At 7, the dog moved more carefully now, favoring no limb, but resting with the confidence of one who knew exactly where he belonged. His amber eyes followed Daniel with a calm devotion, tail thumping once when their gazes met. The scar beneath his fur, hidden now, no longer defined him. He breathed deep, and even the way soldiers do when the watch has ended. Morning came as it always did in winter, quietly and without ceremony. Daniel stepped outside with Rocky at his side, boots sinking slightly into frost-kissed sand. The beach was empty, the kind of emptiness that felt earned rather than abandoned. They walked together along the waterline. Daniel's stride unhurried Rocky's shoulder, brushing his leg in perfect alignment. There were no leashes, no commands spoken aloud. They had long ago learned how to read each other without words. Daniel's thoughts drifted not backward, but inward. He considered the strange alchemy of justice, the way truth sometimes needed witnesses to survive, the way silence could be strength when chosen rather than imposed. He felt gratitude sharp and humbling for the people who had done their jobs when it mattered, and for the one being who had never once asked him to explain who he used to be. Waves rolled in with a patient rhythm, whitecaps dissolving into gray foam before retreating. Rocky paused, sniffed the air, then looked up at Daniel as if checking a perimeter only he could see. Daniel smiled faintly, the expression unfamiliar but genuine, and gave a small nod. All clear. They walked on. In town, life continued. Lucas Bennett donned an orange vest and learned the weight of a trash bag filled by his own hands. Officer Mark Harlan faced long days of waiting and reflection. Hannah Moore closed her shift and walked home beneath the same winter sky, carrying the quiet satisfaction of having stood firm when it counted. And on the beach, the noise of the world fell away. There were no sirens now, no raised voices, no cages or flashing lights, only the sea breathing in and out, and two survivors moving through the cold together, leaving a line of footprints that the tide would soon erase. Daniel did not mind. Some things were meant to pass unseen, their value measured not by permanence, but by peace. When the sun climbed higher, Daniel turned back toward the cabin, Rocky falling into step without prompting. Winter would linger, as it always did, but it no longer felt like a sentence. It felt like a season. And in that season, a man who had learned to be quiet found that quiet could be full, and that survival shared was enough. In a world that grows louder every day, this story reminds us that true strength is often quiet. Daniel never raised his voice, never struck back, never demanded recognition. And yet justice still found its way to him. That is not coincidence, it is grace. Sometimes God does not arrive with thunder, but with timing, with truth rising at the exact moment it is needed, with a loyal heart like Rocky's that refuses to abandon love even in fear. In our daily lives, we may feel unseen, misunderstood, or treated unfairly. This story whispers a promise: stay faithful to who you are. Do the right thing when no one is watching. Protect what God has placed in your care. Miracles often begin the moment we choose restraint over anger, faith over bitterness. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of dignity and quiet courage. May God bless you, protect your family, and grant you peace in every season of your life.